Hello YouTube, it's DasGregor. This is another midweek Gentoo in review. Last week I talked to you guys about how I had rebuilt my system 3 or 4 different times. Actually it was 3 times, not 3 or 4, it was 3. And I told you about my headaches of what happens when you don't pay attention to your power cord and you allow for partitions to be destroyed by your system shutting down on you. Well, I'd asked if people would like me to continue on midweek review, so I thought I might go ahead and do that. And today we're going to be discussing a very good tool within Gentoo, which you have to install manually after you build everything, called the Gentoolkit. Now, a simple way to install this, I'm just going to go ahead and minimize my ugly mug right here so you don't have to look at that, if I can figure out how to do that. Now, when you're at the command prompt, just to install this, you just need a simple emerge AV and Gentoolkit. Now, I always use the -AV. -A stands for ask, -V stands for verbose. I always think it's important to always use, at least at the minimum, the -A. Because you never know when you're going to install something that you don't realize is going to take up a whole bunch of other programs with it. And for instance, you've got a KDE system built on Qt, you throw an application that's, say, based off of GDK, which is the GNOME toolkit, and suddenly it's installing all of this GNOME library stuff just so you can get that to work. And it's best to be able to see that it's going to do that, stop it if you really don't want to do it, and to move on. As we can see, I already have it installed, so we don't need to do anything, but that's all you need to do to get that. And we move on. Now, the Gentoolkit has a couple tools that are very handy. I'm going to try and keep this video not too long because I don't want it to be sounding like I'm rambling. I'm just going to gloss over some of these things really briefly with you. The biggest thing about Gentoo is they have excellent places to go and look for information. And in this case, all I did was a quick Google search on Gentoo, Gentoolkit, wiki, found it immediately. Here it is. And as we see, it talks about what exactly it is, how easy it is to install it, and then it talks about the main tools. The biggest one is equery. I use equery a lot to find out what the use packages of specific applications are and whether or not I want to enable those applications. For instance, say you wanted to install Clementine. Now, I already have Clementine on here, but say we want to install that, so I do a -AV and we do Clementine. It looks for it, it finds it, and it should pull up the dependencies here, and it will also list a set of use options at the end. Now, the biggest thing about Gentoo in regards to how it builds applications and why it's so powerful for you is that you get to choose what's built into the application and what's not built into the application. It's really important to look at these use flags, especially if you're not too familiar with how you're setting up your system. If we look at this, we'll notice there really aren't that many use flags available. CDDA, dbus, Google Drive, Mood Bar, MTP, UDEV, and a Wii Remote, or at least Wiimote as it's called. There's a debug, Last.fm, MMS, etc. And then of course the language files that you can add in there. Now, some of you might look at those and say, I have no clue what MTP is, or what is CDDA going to do for me? So we say, no, we don't want to compile this just yet, and we do an equery on this. Type in equery uses Clementine, and we get a list of all those use flags. It shows, for instance, the red are set, the blue are unset. And if we look at CDDA, what was that? Well, that's going to add compact disc digital audio or standard audio CD support. Well, of course, if we're going to play CDs, we're going to want to enable that. And if we look at dbus, it enables the dbus support for anything that needs it. GPSD, oh my goodness, I'm not going to even try to say that, etc. I could do that one. Debug, you seldom, unless you're wanting to build in all that extra stuff to see what might be blowing up. If you're having problems with an application, it's really good to go ahead and rebuild it with debug so that it can build that debug data that you can grab when it crashes to either send to the developer or have it to figure out yourself. Google Drive, for instance, enabling the Google Drive support so you can access your files if you store things through there. Last.fm support, enabling the media streaming through there. And then, of course, you have all of these language options that you can choose from. MMS support for the Microsoft Media Server. Moodbar for enabling Moodbar streams. MTP, which enables support for the Media Transport Protocol. Now, that's really useful if, for instance, you have an external MP3 player that you can connect to your system and you want Gentoo or Linux in general to be able to read it. That's the library that you're going to use. UDEV enables the UDEV integration. And the Wii Remote, of course, if you have a Nintendo Wii, you can actually incorporate the Wii Remote control so that it can control your Clementine audio program through it. Pretty nifty. That was very helpful information. At least I found it helpful. You can use this, for instance, equery uses with anything else. It's also very helpful if you look in here, for instance, about finding packages, where they come from. For instance, if you know the name of a application, but you don't know the package that you had gotten that application from. For instance, the other day, I was trying to figure out where I got ISO hybrid. So I did an equery belongs ISO hybrid. And if I did that right, it should bring up the package that ISO hybrid belongs to. While that's thinking about it and looking, because it's probably going through a lot of packages trying to find the right one. If we move on, we can see that we can verify the integrity and check a package to make sure it's good. We can look at packages depending on a specific package. We can get dependency graphs. And we see, for instance, this has now popped up, that sysboot syslinux is the name of the package that provides user bin ISO hybrid. Very useful tool. All of these are great and handy. The biggest things, like I said, are being able to look at it and see what the use flags are and what they mean to determine whether or not you want to add them or delete them in your use files. It's also handy to see what packages might depend on something, such as if you're using FFmpeg, what programs were built using FFmpeg and I have heard too that libav soon will be replacing FFmpeg, that it's being deprecated. So it might be very handy to know what applications you've built off of FFmpeg and see when they're available to rebuild that package using the newer library. There's lots that they go through. In fact, if you look at this, they have 13 topics on equery alone before they even go into the next one, which is EUs. Now, I haven't used EUs that much, but EUs pretty much allows you to set and unset your use flags from the command line. I personally don't do this. I would prefer to edit manually my /etc portage make file and do things manually there. And in fact, if we look at the portage file, as I said, it's in /etc portage /make.conf. And if we look here, we'll see that I have a couple used things that I was playing with, but for the most part, I've kept my use area as slim as possible. Now you'll see here my old make.conf is what I used to have from one of my older systems, I always keep that handy just as a reference to go back. While I'm in the make.conf, I might as well talk about a few things. The CF flags is something that it pretty much puts in there, and I leave it alone, along with, of course, the C host, which is telling you what your architecture is. Now, I have a Core i7, which has 8 different processors, as we can see up here. They show them all running. This is where you're going to set that with your make ops of how many processors it's going to use. I actually throw 2 above what it says it can do, which is probably why my system gets so hot, but it burns through compiling super fast with that. My use command, which is there, the mirrors that I look at, and then this is another handy feature to have. Emerge default ops -- auto unmask right. Now this can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. For instance, if you don't use a -ask and there is a use flag that needs to be changed, or say for instance you're trying to open up something that's been masked, it's going to auto set up those. You still have to confirm and write to them, but it's going to auto do that for you. If you use the -a, it'll always ask you whether or not you want to write those changes, and then of course you still have to do the manual setup to finalize everything. Accepting licenses just makes it a lot easier if you're happy with the fact that, hey, I don't care, I just accept the license, I'm going to use it. Video card, you can set up your specific video card so it can build those into it. And then your input devices is keyboard, your mouse, trackpad. EVDev is one of the newer things that it's using nowadays with the Xorg. And of course I've got Layman installed so I can add different repositories, and so that's where my Layman configurations for the make are there, where they're located. Anyway, as you can see, if you subtract these 2 commented areas, I'm using very few use flags. If we look at the main use area, that's in etc portage / package .use. And we'll see here that, for instance, I'm using WPA supplicant, and I don't want it to build the GUI application for it, so I use -qt4 so it doesn't build the GUI. I just do it through the command line interface. You can see, for instance, where I'm with Firefox, how I told it to use -bin_dist, and that what it does is it doesn't use a pre-made package, it builds it from scratch, and because of that, it allows Firefox to be laid down there instead of using a different type of overlay for that. And then of course it incorporates GStreamer and allows for Wi-Fi. And my cups, I have to for some reason use GNU TLS so that it will work with my network drivers and connect to the brother laser printer that I have. If we look at transcode, I've thrown in there a few extra codecs that I want to be able to use with that. K3B, I wanted to be able to work with video files, so I added FFmpeg. As you can see, if you just pause your screen and look, those are the ones that I've added. And I make sure that I always comment stuff as much as I can so I know and have a better idea. Down here, of course, if you use the auto unmask, this is what you're going to see when you accept those types of updates. And they're a little bit different here. So you can see the difference there, and that's what you'll see. Now, if you ever accept the auto unmask, there are 2 ways that you can update then those files. One is to use the etc update, which is, it's an older way of doing it, but that's what I'm used to doing. So I would click on that. It would look for any configuration changes, and then it would allow me to look at the file and compare and figure out what they're going to do, what changes. The other one that you can use is dispatch.conf, I believe. And it's been so long since I've used that one. I am a big fan of etc update. You got to remember, I've been using this for a lot of years, and that's the old way. That's the way I feel comfortable. In fact, I can't remember off the top of my head what the new one is, just because that's what I use, etc update. Once you ever change anything like that and you've updated, this is the next step you have to do to actually finalize those updates before you can change your world flags and try to re-emerge the product. Already I can tell though that I've gone a long way into this, so we'll move on. We got past the EUs. It kind of lumps the rest of these things all at once. RevDep Rebuild is your next most important package you will ever use. The greatest thing about RevDep Rebuild is if you don't have preserved libraries enabled, which some people don't like because they don't want to be always hounded with that, especially if they're changing a lot of their different files, then RevDep Rebuild will run at the end and look for any broken libraries that you've created and any broken dependencies that might exist because of an update that you've done to certain files. It will find those. It will tell you what it needs to rebuild. For instance, say for instance FFmpeg gets updated. If we'd look at FFmpeg right now, for instance, I'm just going to do a -s. -s will let us see the package, give a brief description of it, and tell us that we are running, for instance, 0.10.3. Now, if we look in user, portage, and that was for virtual, but if we look at media-video, FFmpeg, we will see that there is 0.10.8, 107, 1.22, 1.23, and 2.01. What that means is you have the ability to actually install any of these. But if we look up here into media video, we will find that we're actually running 1.07, and even though it had newer versions, it says the latest available version is 107 as well. And that's because the other ones are in testing, haven't been fully debugged, but they are still available if you were to need to use those and install them. In which case, if you tried to install something new, for instance, if I tried to do, say, -av equals ffmpeg dash, we'll say 2.01.0.1, let it think for a moment, it's going to come back and tell me that that's been masked and that I'm going to have to accept that it be unmasked before I can upgrade. And while it does that, it's also going to look for any other dependencies that might need to be updated to make 2.0.1 work and go forward. While it thinks about that, I'm going to go ahead and come back over here to the Gentoolkit. Yeah, you see, it came back with some scary stuff. This isn't scary. You just need to understand what it all means. The U means that it's going to update. The hash there means that there's some things that we need to look at. For instance, the following keywords are necessary to proceed, and it's saying that the tilde AMD64 needs to be changed in the package.keywords, which means that you're unlocking a file that shouldn't be used. It's still in testing. It's also saying that this has been masked, and it says it for other things that requires that you're going to have to unmask it, which means that in the package.unmask we need to add media video ffmpeg-2.01 so that we can also install it. Now, if I was to say yes to this right here, would you like these changes to be added? Now, that was asked to me because I'd use that -- auto unmask feature. Now, if I say yes, it's going to write those temporary files, and then I'd use the etc config, and I could then finalize those two things to be added with comments that explain why they're being added. If I did that and then tried to do another emerge-av, it would come back and say that, okay, let's install it, and it would let you go forward. Now, just a brief thing on that. We'll talk about some of these maybe later in a different episode when we talk about maybe installing a new system and the importance of setting up your profiles so that your use flags are predetermined mostly for you. Revved up rebuild, as I said, is something great to use to find broken dependencies, libraries that have been updated, but the package that depended upon that library need to be rebuilt towards that new file, etc. We move on to glsa-check, which is going to look for, well, let's just get down there because it explains it a little bit better than what I can do. There we are. It's a test tool that keeps track of the various Gentoo Linux security advisory. That's what I couldn't remember off the top of my head. And we'll talk, it'll send it out to you and tell you all about it. eRead will let you look at specific logs as to portage. And then the last one that's a handy thing to look at is eClean. eClean will clean out all of the files that you have downloaded to the user portage dist files area. Anytime that you install a file, it throws those files into this area. If we do an ls, for instance, of my user portage dist file area, oops, I accidentally hit the caps, then we see a long list of all these files, and these are all the programs that I've installed on this system, and it's downloaded. So we have all of these compressed files all down here, and eClean would clean them out. That can be good and that can be bad. For instance, sometimes you might need to go back to an older version, but the portage tree's been updated and that version is no longer available as an e-build. You still have the package that you can work with, but that's a totally different subject. I hope I haven't rambled too much. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this quick little inspirational thing about the Gentoolkit. If I look at simple screen, we have been going on for 22 minutes. I was trying to do this under 10. I just talk way too much. But hopefully this is useful information. Hopefully you didn't get too bored with it. And I hope that maybe I can start trying to do more midweek type things where I was thinking that maybe something a little bit smaller might be better. But we'll go with this for now. We'll see how many of you guys liked it. Maybe I just need to break it down into a little bit less because I really want to keep these little how-tos and what's abouts and fancy things down to 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe I just need to learn to ramble less. Who knows? Anyway, enjoy. I'll have this uploaded soon. And of course, this weekend we are still going to have a new distribution. It'll come a little early because I'm going away for the weekend. So I'll be sending it out probably my time. It's going to be like 10, 11 in the morning when I finally get it uploaded. I'm still working on that. The new review for the week. Be a little early, like I said, but I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. So if it's morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your support. I appreciate all your views, and I especially enjoy chatting with you guys online. It didn't bother me one bit, all the teasing I got about trying to name my kids after SUSE distributions. I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, maybe I ought to just create a Linux distribution and name it after my children so that they still have I keep wanting to say Gentoo. They still have a Linux distribution named after them. Who knows? What do you think? Talk to y'all later. Have a great one. Bye.